Good afternoon. Thank you all for being with us today. And welcome to our panel discussion in recognition of National Principals Month. My name is Jane Elsperman, and I'm the president of the National Association of Secondary School Principals and a principal in Marion County Public Schools in Ocala, Florida. My colleagues and I are gratified to see so many members of the education policy community gathered here for a deep dive into the role of the principal. Today we're going to be looking at what the principalship means with the Every Student Succeeds Act. The American Federation of School Administrators, the National Association of Elementary School Principals, and the National Association of Secondary School Principals have long shared a common mission to secure the best possible education for each child by promoting and supporting high-quality school leadership. We've always known that leadership matters. Only recently, leadership has become central to both the education's national research and education policy agendas. Most prominently, the Wallace Foundation researched the principal's role for more than a decade. Their conclusion? Leadership is one of the most important factors that impacts student performance, second only to instruction. The Wallace Foundation identified 5 essential domains of the principal's work: shaping a vision of academic success for all students, creating a climate hospitable to education, cultivating leadership in others, improving instruction, and managing people, data, and processes to foster school improvement. On the strength of that research, our organizations lobbied hard and were successful in securing language in ESSA that recognizes and supports the principal's work. Most prominently, a provision in ESSA encourages states to set aside a portion of federal funds specifically for principal development. We're also very appreciative that the U.S. Department of Education re-emphasized that provision in their recent Title II guidance to states. To quote the guidance, effective principals, assistant principals, and other school leaders are essential to student success, particularly in schools with large numbers of students from low-income families and minority students. It continues. We strongly encourage each state to take advantage of these unprecedented opportunities to support principals and devote a significant portion of its state activities funds to improving school leadership. You can be certain that we will carry this message to state policymakers and remind them of the simple, universal reality that both Congress and the Department of Education have recognized. An investment in leadership is an investment in learning. The importance of leadership recently entered the global education conversation. Late last month, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, which brings us the Program for International Student Assessment, or PISA, that looks at 15-year-old school pupils' scholastic performance on mathematics, science, and reading, issued a report. The Deputy Director of Education at the OECD discussed the findings in an interview with the Huffington Post, and here's what he said. The ingredients that make up an excellent learning environment often vary from school to school, country to country, and culture to culture. But what every great school has in common is great leadership. He went on to say, new sets of skills such as teamwork, innovation, and creativity are becoming increasingly important. The leaders of this major transformation can only be the principals and the teachers, but principals need to be able to show the way in this uncertain world. Those are powerful words. It's a massive responsibility, and the path is riddled with obstacles. Earlier this month, the Institute for Education Sciences reported on their analysis of the principal's work week. The average high school principal spends 62.5 hours each week on the job, only 30% of which is spent on administrative tasks. The expectations are great, and I can personally attest the principalship is the most rewarding job in education. That is what we celebrate during National Principals Month. Schools and communities throughout the country are hosting various celebrations, hanging banners in the hallway, recognizing their principals at school board meetings, and offering many other signs of appreciation simply because National Principals Month gives them an occasion to do so. While this recognition is appreciated, many of these outstanding leaders shy away from being the center of attention. As a nation, we cannot limit the recognition of our school leaders to the local level. Events like this one remind us of the bigger conversation we need to have as a nation and provide a platform for the conversation that leadership matters. To every principal in this country, we offer you our sincere thanks and appreciation for all you do to make our schools a special place to work and learn. You impact the future every day, and we honor you not only this month, but every day. You are the heart and the soul of your school, and our nation appreciates your dedication and professionalism. Thank you. At this time, it's my privilege to introduce the NAESP President, Stephen Geis.
Thank you, Jane. On behalf of NAESP, we appreciate the collaboration with both NASSP and ESSA to ensure that principals' voice is heard and school leadership remains a matter of national priority in an educational reform and debate. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stephen Geis, and I'm the president of the National Association of Elementary School Principals, NAESP. I am also the proud principal of North Trail Elementary, a pre-K through 5 building in Farmington, Minnesota since 2005. It is a pleasure to bring up this very important discussion around the important role of principals and other school leaders on Capitol Hill during National Principals Month. I would like to extend a welcome to our practitioners joining us here today from their busy roles and responsibilities, and wish them too a happy Principals Month and thank them for their service. As part of the celebration of principals, it is imperative to help policymakers and stakeholders in education understand the critical need to support principals and principal leadership, especially as the states and districts plan for the implementation of Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA. Over the past several years, NAESP has been proud leader of the pre-K-8 principal voice to ensure that policy efforts at the federal level reflect not only the latest research about young children and how they learn, but the perspective of principals is not overlooked. For far too long, principals and teachers have had to contend with onerous federal policies of No Child Left Behind that included the one-size-fits-all accountability that stifled educators' ability to meet the needs of the whole child and to provide a complete and well-rounded education. As we know, that the law fell far short in supporting the role of principals and certainly differentiating their needs as instructional leaders across a pre-K through 12 continuum. This was a crucial flaw in the policy in light of the research and evidence that has been amassed over the past decade. As Jane noted, there is now a growing body of evidence that shows that effective principal leadership is second only to effective teaching when considering all the factors that lead to improved student outcomes. Now, thankfully, we have a new federal law that provides not only for multi-tiered systems and an opportunity to reduce an over-reliance on high-stakes testing and focus on social and emotional learning, but an unprecedented number of options for states and districts to support the role of principals. Based on the survey work this past year of NAESP, ESSA, and NASSP, members, over 60% of the nation's principals spend less than 1% of their workday per year in state or district-sponsored professional development. Comparatively, teachers typically spend 2 to 3% of their total workdays a year on state or district-sponsored professional learning. Our survey data also shows, by and large, districts do not tailor professional development opportunities to meet the needs of their specific leadership. In many cases, principals are only afforded an opportunity to attend professional learning sessions that are created and designed for teachers. Fortunately, ESSA can change this equation and provide the kind of system that will truly build the capacity of our nation's school leaders by supporting the principal pipeline, which includes principal recruitment, preparation, and retention, or ongoing professional learning and growth to meet the needs of principals. This is important as we know a highly effective principal can increase his or her students' scores by 10 percentage points on standardized tests in just 1 year. Principals can also affect other student outcomes, such as reducing absenteeism and suspensions and improve graduation rates. The consideration to support our nation's principals is pressing as the nation faces increasing teacher and principal turnover rates. Studies show that a principal in a high-poverty school with many challenges has the greatest impact on student outcomes. However, unfortunately, principals typically transfer to less challenging schools after they have gained experience, which is an issue, among others, that we will discuss in greater detail this afternoon. Today's discussion will also explore solutions, such as the connection between effective principal and their ability to retain and recruit great teachers. Numerous studies have shown that less effective teachers tend to leave schools with effective principals, while more effective teachers tend to leave when the school is taken over by an ineffective principal. As noted, we have solutions to many of the challenges in our system, one of which is thoroughly and effectively supporting the nation's principals. Under ESSA, states and districts can address this issue and maximize the importance of instructional leadership and student growth through numerous strategies, such as offering additional summer professional development opportunities with continuous coaching or mentorship throughout the school year, establishing state and district-wide collaborative cohorts who engage in regular professional engagement, increase funding for attendance at conferences and events that provide collaboration time nationally and regionally focused on instructional leadership and problems of practice. And we are not talking about one-day workshops. This means job-embedded support, which is now required by law to the definition of professional development. To discuss these issues and many more solutions offered by the practitioners with you today, please join me in welcoming our moderator, Ms. Allison Klein. Allison is a federal policy reporter for Education Week and the co-author of the Politics K-12 blog. She's been at Education Week for 10 years, covering everything from how schools have recovered from Hurricane Katrina to the implementation of Every Student Succeeds Act. She's appeared on NPR, the PBS NewsHour, C-SPAN, and CNN to discuss educational news. Please welcome Allison.
Thanks so much for that nice introduction, and I want to say Happy Principals Month to everyone in the room. As most of you know, and as you've heard today, Congress recently passed ESSA, which was a law to replace the much maligned, and I know everyone here in this room knows exactly how maligned, No Child Left Behind Act. And as you've heard, the new law seeks to give greater control over spending, accountability, and school improvement to school districts, states, and yes, principals and teachers. Even though it consolidates a big number of programs, it creates new opportunities for states to use, as you've heard, a piece of their professional development funding for principal training. So what are the implications of ESSA for school leaders? How can they use the new flexibilities in the law to improve outcomes for their students? And with us to unpack these difficult questions, we have a great panel of experienced and celebrated educators. With us, we have Carol Hahn, who's the principal at Bellows Spring Elementary School in Ellicott City, Maryland, and the 2015 NAESP Maryland Distinguished Principal. We also have Robert Motley, who's the principal of Glenwood Middle School in Glenwood, Maryland, and he is the 2006 Maryland NASSP Principal of the Year. We're also joined by Ernest Logan, a former principal of IS 55 D23, I hope I got that right, in Brooklyn, New York, and the president of the Council of School Supervisors and Administrators, as well as the executive vice president of AFSA. And we're joined by a teacher, Leanne Stevens. She's the 2007 Minnesota Teacher of the Year, Minnesota well represented here. She works as a teacher and equity coach on special assignment with the St. Louis Park School District. Thanks to all four of you for taking time out of your busy schedules. I mean, the principalship is one of the busiest jobs in education, and we really appreciate you taking the time. And on a personal note, I'm so excited that two of you are from Maryland's Howard County Public Schools, since I went there for my whole K-12 career. Yeah. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we'll have time at the end for folks in the room to ask questions. If you're on the live stream, we are not leaving you out. If you have a question, please tweet at us at #ThinkAPrincipal. And without further ado, we'll kick things off. As I mentioned, it is National Principals Month. So I'm just wondering, in general, what's one thing that you think everyone out there should know, especially policymakers, about the principalship?
Well, I will say that the principles that we have today are not the principles of the past. We have new responsibilities. We're not the person sitting in the office that looks out the window every once in a while to see what everyone's doing. We're active. We're with the children. We're evaluating teachers. We're instructional leaders. We're building community within our neighborhoods. So we have a lot of jobs to do.
I like that idea. I look at the principalship with lots of different words. Visionary leader, mediator, collaborator, parent, judge, jury, manager. And I think so often is that we think of the school principal as someone that can handle everything else that no one else can handle. And yet our primary responsibility is really instructional. And yet we spend very little time really doing instruction because we're busy trying to handle all the mandates that someone else has imposed upon us.
I'd further add to that. I think of it as sort of like a CEO. I mean, there's a financial aspect of it as well that not many people know about. You have a budget that you manage, that you run, and you run your entire building. And then on top of that, you're juggling to really make sure that three entities are always happy, if you will. You've got your parents, you've got your teachers, and you've got your students. And so really juggling those three, making sure that everyone's engaged, that they're happy to be a part of your school. And so that's when that whole notion of school climate and engagement comes into play as well.
And then from a teacher's perspective, I look at it as a partnership. And so very collaborative. It's really important for me as a teacher to have a principal who is very collaborative and allows me to take risks and treats me as the professional that I am. And so that's been my experience with the principals that I've had that have been really effective in my building. And I've had a lot of principals. I've been teaching for a long time, so I have a lot of principals.
So we've heard how important the principalship is. As many of you in this room are probably aware, the House and Senate Labor HHS education proposals, that's in layman's terms, that is a spending bill for K-12 education and some other things, would cut Title II, which as most of you know is the primary source, federal source, of principal and teacher professional development money. And I'm wondering, how might that affect, how do you think that could affect your school district?
Well, let me start with that. From a perspective of principal of a school, but also from a labor leader's perspective, and someone who has really been involved with leadership development for over 20 years now, the case is that people have decided that when you get to the level of principal, they don't think that you need to learn anything else. And they've taken this attitude that the only ones who need to be professionally developed are teachers. Let's professionally develop the teachers. And then when they send the school leader to professional development, it's always based on the teacher's professional development. And so in the perspective of what we've done in New York City down through the years is that we've learned to lobby the state leaders and the city leaders to come into the schools to understand what it's like to do the job of a principal. And so with programs like Principal for a Day or some of the others, we've opened up the doors so people can walk into your shoes every day to realize what needs to happen. And what was also important is that when they would put down mandates that you needed to then deal with, whether it was bullying or grief counseling or any other myriad of things that would come up, we would say, well, how are we going to implement this if we have not been trained in it ourselves? So the idea that we would think to cut back on the limited funding that they were giving in the first place causes us all to take a deep breath and say, what do we do? Because I'm about solutions. What do we do to get people to understand how important funding is for the role of the leader? And when I talk about the school leader, I just don't talk about the principal, but the principal comes with a team. And too often we like to say that it's just the principal. Well, the principal has an administrative team and each one plays a role in trying to move the agenda. And the primary agenda always has been student achievement and student health and safety.
Does anybody else want to add about what federal funding cuts might mean?
Well, I'd just like to add, research has shown that the longer you're in the position of principalship, the more effective you are. And so I think particularly for principals that are just starting out, to cut professional development opportunities for them as they're learning the position, I think is devastating to student achievement, and which ultimately impacts. And so I think as we look at Title II and really looking at targeting that professional development for especially our beginning principals, to really make sure that they receive the proper training to be as effective as they can to lead their buildings.
And also, let me just add one other piece to that. Too often, I think we try to define school leadership as everyone who's in the district who's doing leadership. And sometimes we throw in the school board. We need to have money for the school board. Sometimes we look at the superintendent. We need to train them. And so Wallace got a lot of money to train superintendents. And many times they left out the idea of the principal. They thought the superintendent should train the principals, provide professional development for the principal. But they had their own roles to do. And so the principal always was caught short. Very few people had time for the principal. And then they were afraid to take the principal out of the building to be professionally developed. And I always said they wanted us to be these corporate citizens. You know, they thought of us as CEOs. And I came out of an administration in New York City where the former mayor believed that we should all be CEOs. But you know what was interesting? They didn't take us out like CEOs and send us up to a training place for a week to be professionally developed. The banks did that. They sent their top leaders, and they spent a lot of money on them. And what we do in public education is that we want the principal to be everything, but yet we don't want to put the resources in to make the principal everything.
Yeah, I hear that.
And I was just going to add I'm an elementary principal, so from a pre-K through 5th grade perspective, it's so great for us to be able to intervene at an early age with those children. And all our professional development teaches us new tactics, new interventions that we can use that impact then education all through secondary school. So when they cut that money, those opportunities go away.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's important.
Okay, I'll move on to our next question, which is, you've all alluded to this, right? The role of the principalship has changed a lot over the years. Do you feel like professional development opportunities have kept up with those changes? And do you think that state and federal and maybe even district policy has acknowledged those changes?
I will say a couple things. One, I think when money is cut, professional development does go away somewhat. I also think that those principals who take initiative and join professional organizations and seek out professional development on their own, they continue to grow and change. They come back with strong visions for their school to lead change. But I think as things have gotten more expensive, opportunities for principals to do that on their own have changed it as well. Because, of course, our pay scale hasn't increased as frequently.
Yeah. Anyone else want to add to that?
Well, I'll touch on some of that. I think one of the things that seems to have happened is as new initiatives have come up, we have not really kept pace with what the new changes are. And we don't really evaluate what it is that they want us to do. So right away, someone has a new idea, and they throw it out, and they expect you to implement it immediately. And there's nothing that says that this even works, that this even makes sense. But they want it implemented. And then they say, okay, well, we'll send you to a one-day or a half-a-day training on how to do this. And then you're supposed to come back and implement something that you haven't quite absorbed yourself. And then someone comes and holds you accountable for doing that and say the reason that the students didn't do well is because the leader didn't implement the program that the people who designed and thought that was a great idea are not so sure about it themselves. And so we go around this circle, constant on this circle. And one of the issues I always have with professional development is how do we evaluate the professional development? Is it results driven? Is it because somebody has come up with a great idea that we should all just go do that? And I think that's a problem I have going forward with this. So we can spend all the money we want to on professional development, but it has to be relevant. It has to be something that's meaningful. It has to be result driven. And I think professional development given by people who have done the work is more meaningful and practical than someone from an organization from outside or not from the academic world.
To add on to that, that's exactly the conversations that teachers are having all the time about professional development. I'm like, wait, we're having those conversations all the time, like, you know. So I think it really does go even beyond the principals. I think it's professional development for educators in general. That sure sounds like the conversations I'm having all the time.
So we're hearing that teachers and principals agree on this. Did you want to add anything before we move on?
Well, I think what I wanted to say, and I think your question was, has the professional development kept up? And
Yeah.
I think that really goes hand in hand with your district leaders and what it is that they see as priorities, and are they really keeping up with things? And so from a personal perspective, I can certainly speak to some professional development that I received. This is my 11th year in the principalship. And so you can imagine that anything that comes before me, I'm kind of jaded, I've done it all, seen it all, et cetera. But we recently, our superintendent recently introduced to us the notion of the Gallup Corporation and their strength-based leadership, and really focusing on your strengths as a leader and what that means for your building and the impact that may have. And so really delving into looking at my strengths as a leader and how that impacts my leadership in my building, it really was insightful in that sense. And so I do think that there are opportunities where leadership has really, I guess, becomes relevant and has maintained and really proves to be effective for administrators. But I think, again, it comes from that district leadership and what they're doing. So.
Okay, thank you. That was a great point. So shifting gears a little bit to the Every Student Succeeds Act. Obviously, this is our new education law. It's really just not even a year old yet. So we're really sort of getting a chance to see what it's going to look like in implementation. We're not really sure yet. So as we move into this implementation phase, what are you all most excited about, and what are you most nervous about? What about this law kind of keeps you up at night?
May I start?
Yes, absolutely. Please do.
I'm really excited.
Okay.
So there's several things I'm really excited about. And I think the first and foremost are the other accountability measures that are being introduced that schools are being allowed to use, whether it be engagement of students and or staff, or whether it be your school climate. I think those are really good indicators of what's happening in your building that really have been neglected and never been included before, and so I think that those are important features. Again, I'm going back to my own district, but we actually use a Gallup student and staff engagement survey, and that really tells us a lot about what's happening in our buildings, and we actually base school improvement goals on those engagement results. So I think that's very important, and I'm really excited about that being a part of that, of the provision. And then secondly, just the fact that we now have the possibility to use other assessments, whether it be the SAT or ACT, that there are other opportunities that we have to use as far as tests and assessments for our students. So those are 2 points that I'm really excited about.
Anyone else want to talk about?
And I would say I'm excited as well, also for that engagement piece and that looking at the whole climate within a school. You know, the social emotional piece is so critical, especially at the elementary level. We have to make sure everyone feels safe at school and has a relationship with someone in the building. It counts across all school levels, but especially at the elementary level, so those children are open for all the learning that can take place there. So I'm very excited. I'm excited about having more local control, so that the states, I'm sure Maryland has different needs than, say, Idaho or Alaska, so that our states can make more determination. And again, the thing that might make me a little hesitant, I don't know where they're going to go with all the pre-K monies and things like that. So I want to make sure that our youngest children and also our ELL our English language learners. My school has students represented from over 30 different nations. We have 15 different languages spoken at our school. And so making sure that those children have what's going to make them the best students in our, in high school as well, so they continue to grow.
Looks like you're taking a lot of notes over there.
No,
Do you have anything you want to add?
Well, I do have, I'm very happy about the local control, very happy about some of the diversity initiatives in regards to recruitment. My concern is, though, with anything that comes out of government, is how is it implemented? I come from a long history in our state of New York where a lot of what was done became punitive against school leaders without giving them the resources to effectively meet all of the needs. I don't think we've done a very good job with dealing with English language learners or students with special needs. Hopefully with this, we'll get an opportunity to look at the total engagement, as people will say. I'm taking engagement a lot further than just engaging, but what we're really doing about meeting the needs of those students, how are we engaging the needs of those students and parents, that we can support their achievement. And I like the idea of this multiple assessments, because I think, and we've worked very hard, and I have to commend the folks for really working on this, because we finally got people to understand it's not just about testing. You know, it's not just about how Johnny scores on a test that we've given up to. But I think it's going to fall on us at the local level to really push our state legislatures and our local LEAs to see to it how they're looking at the guidance that's coming from the education department and how they implement the things that need to be done here. How do they implement this law? And I think that's always been a problem. And you're right, Maryland is different than New York City and have different needs in New York State. But we need to really hold our states accountable for how they implement the law. And when the federal government says something, there's really very little oversight. You have very little oversight to make sure that the state is doing what it should be doing. Okay. So it falls on us at the local level to do that.
Yeah. Did you have anything to add, Ms. Stevens? Nope.
Yeah, I think we talked enough.
That's fair enough. Well, that just kicked off, that teed up my next question really well. States right now are thinking about or writing their ESSA plans. They're at least getting some feedback and some ideas. Do you feel like as a principal, or in your case, as a teacher, you have been consulted on your state's ESSA plan? You're all very high-flying educators, so I would think that your state leaders would want to hear from you.
I have been invited to the table, but I haven't gone to the table because I have so many other things that I'm busy with, but I have been invited to the table, so I feel like my state is reaching out to teachers for sure.
Okay.
I would add to that, again, I think this is where our professional organizations come into play. I know that the Maryland Association of Secondary School Principals has been at the table with the Maryland State Department of Education as they are looking and drafting things, and so we are a part of that discussion and do have a voice in the room as decisions are being made, so I feel comfortable about that.
Okay, that's good to hear. Is that you're on the same page? as the
MASP also invited one of the Maryland Associate Superintendents last week. She came to present on ESSA to the principals, so we could hear their thoughts about the law and what they're going to be doing in Maryland. So we feel part of the discussion.
It's great to hear.
And true in New York. In fact, today the commissioner, State Education Commissioner, is holding a meeting in New York City around this issue. So we feel it's very interesting that they've decided to really reach out to us and really. The telling will be when they start to look at how they implement it, that they've taken our suggestions, not just heard us, but really look at our suggestions for how they implement it. And that's always the challenge.
If I may add, but I think that that's something that needs to be, I guess, really underscored is that it isn't when you say, individual principals. There are professional organizations, and so it's important that we as principals do take part in our professional organizations because they represent our voice. And I think, when you hear principals say, well, no one consulted me, well, in reality, it was your organization that was consulted that represents you. And so it's just important that we see our professional organizations as a part of who we are, that they represent us, and that we need to get involved in them. So that's key as well.
Thank you for that. So one of the changes in ESSA, which you all, it sounds like, have had some sort of, or feel like you've been included in weighing in on, is that it would allow states to move beyond, if they chose to, teacher evaluation through student outcomes, and decide on their own what constitutes teacher effectiveness. So what do you feel like makes for an effective teacher or an effective principal? And do you think there's a way to really codify that in a state plan? Can you encapsulate that in a definition?
That's a really difficult question.
Yeah, okay, fair.
Okay. I think we have to move beyond data because there are so many, you use data, but it cannot be the sole lone evaluator for a teacher or for a school or for a principal because there's so many things that go into that. I think principals spend a lot of time making sure we develop community and build relationships and recruit and find the best staff. But not everyone comes to school all on the same level playing field. And I think if we find a way to measure student growth, you know, if they grow 1 year from whatever level they came in, if we find we have a way to measure staff engagement. So we want highly engaged workers. And I always look at my school climate as being such an indicator, because if I have happy teachers and happy parents and children that are excited to come to school, you know, those hard, rigorous tasks that we're asking them to do get a little bit easier, and the children persist through it. So we're focused on a growth mindset and working hard, and so it's hard to, you know, quantify all that into one evaluation. But I don't think teachers writing their student learning outcome for one particular data point has been the most impactful piece of measuring teacher achievement.
So I will answer as well, because actually in my role, I am a racial equity coach, but so not only am I coaching teachers and helping them to build will, skill, and capacity to actually disrupt systemic racism in our district, but I also evaluate them on their effectiveness. And so we do have a tool that I have to use. Personally, I would just rather have somebody else evaluate them and then I come in and coach them, but that's not how it works. And so I evaluate them as well. And so I look at multiple areas. So is there a learner-friendly environment? What's the respect and rapport that's happening in the classroom? What kind of formative assessments are used? What kind of contact have you made with parents? You know, what is the focus? Like, if you have a whole student focus. And so there are a lot of indicators that we use to evaluate teachers, and that's what I do.
It's a really interesting job. Yeah. Does anybody else want to add to this before we move on? No. Okay. Okay, all right. Yeah, it was a tough question. So ESSA takes a new approach to school improvement. It moves beyond the idea of school turnarounds and toward what we're hearing is an evidence-based approach to fixing schools. So I'm wondering, what do you see as the potential of this change, shifting to this more, you know, states and districts will have more say over what kinds of remedies and interventions they use. They'll have to have some sort of grounding in evidence.
I think it's great to have evidence, but I also think the timeline has to not maybe just be 1 year. Because, you know, you can start great things to work at a school, but it's not going to happen in really 9 months. You know, you make a plan in September or August, and then you evaluate it in May, but it might take 3 years to really show that growth. So I think we can use evidence, but expand the timeline for it all.
I think the research has shown that it takes 3 to 5 years to really make an effective change. I think once again, the politics has gotten to the point that we need to have something rapid that we believe in. We need to see something happening. And so we look at, the easiest one they always looked at was as student attendance improved. Well, student attendance improves provided that you have great weather. You don't have students who are in temporary housing situations. You don't have a transient population. A lot of things affect student attendance. So you can't always just use it as the way, but I think you need to look at a holistic approach of a school, and you need to spend time allowing the school to have some time, because you might plan it for July and August. But you know, a lot of things happen when school opens up. All of a sudden, some key staff members relocate. So your plan that you had thought of having is not quite working the way you thought it would happen. And so you can't just rely on the fact that in 9 months or 10 months, I'm gonna look back and say, this has happened, so that's why I'm good or I'm not good. And so I think we need to look at a lot of different aspects of that. And the timing, and I get it. I understand people wanna think that this should be like turn in the microwave and push the button and something comes out just the way you want it. But education is very different. And it's hard for us to get other people who are not in this business to understand that.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I mean, I get it. I understand exactly why that term evidence-based is there. You want to make sure when you're investing millions of dollars that it's going to produce, you know, a product that is effective. I mean, I get it. But it also needs to be taken into consideration that, you know, what worked in school A and you got excellent positive results will not always, when replicated, work in school B. And I think that that's key. And that it needs to be tweaked, it needs to be, and so it may not always come out the same way, and so I think that there needs to be some flexibility in that implementation process that needs to be understood when we are looking at improving student achievement.
Did you want to add anything?
Well, I was going to add that I personally, this is my perspective, that we spend a lot of time focusing on trying to fix students. And you know, looking at the deficits that they bring, particularly Black and brown students, deficits. That's our focus a lot, as opposed to looking at what assets they're bringing to the table and how can we build on that. And looking at ourselves as educators and how we're showing up every single day in our classrooms, because we teach who we are, whether we know who we are or not. And so I think a lot of times the focus has been a lot on schooling, compliance, and you know, how this classroom looks, and then we're going to be quiet, or we're going to do, you know, as opposed to really educating our students, and that involves so much more than the compliance piece. And we're looking at, like, how are we building relationships with our students? How are we building relationships with our families? How are we getting to know the students? Are we putting so much onus on the students to educate us about who they are, as opposed to are taking the initiative to find out who they are? So there are a whole lot of, I think, components that make it up.
I think Leanne brings up a very interesting point. We're always trying to fix the student. I wish we'd have more conversations sometimes about why are we trying to fix students? Maybe it's something we need to do about us. You know, if you let students on their own devices learn, as most people are starting to understand, as we start to look, if you allow children to interact with each other, I think they learn a lot more from their peers, as a teacher is the facilitator. I think I found it as a school, a building leader, when I allowed my teachers to be as creative as they could be. I think the school improved and things did really well because people were into things that they wanted to do. You know, you always have some outliners out there that you have to, but most people want to be successful. And I think Leanne just brings up that point, that why are we always trying to fix children? And why are we trying to shape them into something that we think they should be? Because I don't think we quite know what an educated citizen is here. That's a conversation that no one wants to have. And I don't think it's always about having the college degree. We're starting to now learn, after taking away all of the career and technical education, we now realize we have to be able to put career and technical education back on the table so people will be able to have a job.
Absolutely.
That pays them a living wage. So so I don't think we always get it right.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So kind of on the same topic, one of the other changes in ESSA is that in schools where a particular group of students is falling behind, say English language learners or students in special education, racial minorities, low-income kids, the school, if the school is doing well overall but struggling with this particular group of students, the school itself is supposed to come up with its own intervention. And that's a big change from what we've seen in the past, where, you know, the feds mandated certain interventions, tutoring and choice, or the state or district came up with an intervention. So I would think that as principals or school leaders, you all would be a very important part of coming up with some sort of an intervention if your school or another school wasn't doing as well with a particular group of students. So I'm wondering, what do you think of this idea? Do you think this was a good or bad? What's the potential here? What are the pitfalls?
Okay, so I don't know, I'm probably not gonna comment on the pitfalls, whatever, but
Yeah.
I love it, I'm excited
Okay,
about it. And the reason I
okay.
love it is because each school is unique, and so their student body is unique. And we need to be able to take risks, especially if things haven't been working. My thing is like, okay, it hasn't been working, let's find another way. For example, we had, so like in Minnesota, our comprehensive exam, the state exam that they take, Minnesota Comprehensive Exam Assessment, they would take the math one their junior year. And so we were noticing that our Black students were like not doing as well. And so my principal at the time, he's a superintendent now, but he was like, okay, what are we gonna do about this? And we ended up having a single race class, math class. I co-facilitated it because I'm not licensed in high school math, and I have an elementary school license. But so I co-facilitated it, and then there was a math teacher in that classroom. And the two things that came out of that, the very first day of the class, I was like, you know what? We're not gonna tell them this is the syllabus and this is what we're gonna do. I said, we're gonna ask them, what do they need from us to be successful in this class? What do they want from this class? So we did a circle, and I asked them that. And they wanted two things. And I get so emotional when I say this because they said, we wanna be able to ask questions, and we wanna be able to master a concept before you move on to the next one. That was the two things that they wanted. And I was like, you know what? You got it. Literally, that was probably one of the most meaningful classes for me in my career. These were students who like weren't coming to class, like they were always late. I mean, in this class, they were like running with their breakfast, running to get into the classroom because they were front and center. Their needs were front and center. They were like tweeting their test scores. They're like, my mother hung this on the refrigerator. It had never been successful in math, but it was all about what they needed in that class. Of course, money is always an issue, like having a small class and having two teachers, that's not gonna work. So we weren't able to continue that. But, so being able to have schools do innovative things that like, with certain groups of students, I'm like, yes, we need to be able to do that.
That was a really great story. I'm glad you shared that. Does anybody, you wanna follow that?
I love this,
Yeah.
this story.
Yeah, me too.
But I'm also very skeptical of all states doing right by all students.
Okay.
If you go around this country and you go to some states, you see that students who are not doing well, they throw them on the side because nobody's watching. We know that there are high numbers of suspensions of students, not so much because they're acting out, but because they can't do the work, and no one's really trying to engage them in the learning. I love what Leanne is talking about. Now, somebody would hear that. I watched the audience here when she mentioned they do it's race. Ooh, some people looking, didn't like that, didn't know where that was going. But that worked. I'm watching you. But that happened to work in that school. But if you were to say and mandate that you do that, then we'd have a major problem here. See, so I always believe that there needs to be someone who has some oversight. I'm a skeptic. You know, principals like to say sometimes, well, I come out of a world of New York City, we've done autonomy. And where we didn't have superintendents and principals did what they wanted to. I watched some things happen to kids that never should have happened. Yeah. Because we all need to have someone who does a course correction because we're right there in that, surrounded by trees. And we can't always see the larger picture because we're so busy looking at this tree right in front of us. And sometimes you need somebody to take a look. Not to do a micromanaging, but to say, what about trying it this way? Or I see that this is not going that way. So I'm a little skeptical of this, but I'm just happy that we've gotten past what we used to have. I think as most people have, you know, but you know, it's always the devil in the details as you start to implement it. And it's brand new. So I think we need to watch it closely. And as educators, make a determined effort to make sure that we do what's best for children, not what's best for all the adults who we are. Absolutely. And that's the key.
Thank you for that. And I would add, you know, when you have multiple different groups within your school and you're looking for a variety of different interventions, it would be great to have whether it's a national or a state level, just an idea bank or something like these are tried and true interventions, these are ideas, or just the sharing of things that work amongst principals or other school leaders, because Everyone has the best wanting to move children and schools forward, but sometimes you're so busy, that thoughtful part that has to go into the intervention. So if there's a tool there that would help, that would be great.
Do you want to add anything?
Just that, no one knows my school better and my kids better than I do. And so having the opportunity to plan interventions that are best, that I feel would work best for them, I really value that. Not only does that allow me then to tailor what my school and my students need, but it also provides me with some professional responsibility that has historically been taken away from me as a school principal. And so giving that responsibility back to me to be able to handle and to really address some of the issues in my building, I applaud that. So.
Did you, yes,
Yeah,
please.
can I just add one more thing? I was going to say, and it really is about equity.
Yeah.
So when we talk about equity, and because a lot of times you want to go, well, but they're getting this, and then does that mean that they're not going to get this? So there's equality and there's equity. Equality is everybody needs a pair of shoes, and because I wear a size 9, you're all going to get a size 9. So whether they fit you or not, that's equality. But equity is, yeah, we all need shoes, and we're all going to get the size shoe that fits. And so it's not going to look the same for everyone. And so it's not about somebody losing something when someone else gets something. It's all about getting what you need. And I think, to me, that's the key here in this. It's all about equity. And so what your school needs is not going to look like the same in other places as well.
Great. Thank you. Great perspective on that question. So just one more question to close this out before we turn it over to you all and then also to the folks on the live stream. We hear a lot of talk just in DC about improving teacher development. We just had teacher preparation regulations released yesterday. So I'm wondering, as principals and school leaders and as a teacher, do you feel like the principalship gets lost in that shuffle? If you could advise policymakers, and I think there are some folks here today who probably work for them, what would you say is the one thing that they really need to do to make sure that principals are successful?
Can I just say one thing? Ask them what they need
Yeah,
before you determine what they need.
kind of like you were hearing in your class, yeah.
And I think that this came up earlier. Becoming principal doesn't mean that your learning is terminal. I think that we all can benefit from more information, learning more, and I think that making sure that there are monies set aside that aren't guidances about what should be done, but that it's actually allocated for that, that really shows that there is a genuine concern about the professional development of principals, then I think that's a step in the right direction. So even though we have this Title II money, states can still, they don't have to do, they don't have to do it. And so I think that taking it a step further and saying we want this for the development of our principals, because recognizing that is the second factor is building leadership that impacts student achievement, then that's saying something. So that's how I would really address that.
And, I did ask my principal, what does he need? Because that's how I am. Like, I'll just ask anybody, what is it that you need? And I don't think anybody had ever asked me that, especially not a teacher. So I was like, so what is it that you need, like, to be able to, to be successful, to be able to develop professionally? And he said, first of all, he kind of was like, oh, you're asking me that. He said he would love to be able to have opportunities to meet with other principals. He said he doesn't get that. And I feel like we really are concerned about making sure teachers are in their professional learning communities and you're meeting with other teachers. But I don't think we really think about how principals need each other. They need to have professional learning communities with one another to be able to talk about what's happening in their buildings and having those conversations. And so that when he told me that, I was like, wow, that's really good. So if anybody can make that happen for all the principals of the United States of America, you will be an amazing person.
And Leah, what you're watching here today, these are the organizations that make that happen. The conversation between school leaders happens in our organizations, NAESP, NASSP, and ESSA, because we really believe that's the safe space. You see, when we're together, it's a safe space. You're so afraid to say this when you're the superintendent